Aesthetic Exclusivity, the Monks of Thelema and the Emergence of the Aesthetic Novel, a paper presented by Dr. Anne Anderson. Oscar Wilde's persona as the high priest of aestheticism came to the attention of writers, playwrights, satirists and cartoonists surprisingly early. Wilde, denounced as a fraud or a sham aesthete, provoked a wave of vitriol seen at its most cutting on the pages of Punch or the London Charivari. Harry Quilter, William Hurrell Mallock, Robert Buchanan, Frederick Wedmore and even Octave Mirbeau led the way in condemning the gospel of intensity. The Philistine Campaign against aestheticism was wide-ranging. They aimed their barbs at the pre-Raphaelite painter-poet Dante Gabriel Rossetti and the Francophile American artist James McNeill Whistler, the concept of the House Beautiful, which elevated carpets and curtains to the dizzy heights of the fine arts, and the newfound passion for bric-a-brac hunting. In Mallock's New Republic, Mr. Rose, who parodies Walter Pater's sensibilities, has been charmed by the perfect patterns of art wallpapers. To aid his recovery from ugly houses, he takes a scrap of some artistic cretonne with me in my pocket as a kind of aesthetic smelling salts. Mr. Rose's perfect patterns are surely those offered by Morris & Co. In her corpus, Oscar Wilde as a character in Victorian fiction, Angela Kingston touches on The Monks of Thelema, a novel by the well-known duo Walter Besant and James Rice, first serialised in the world. The novel opens with the initiation of two novices, Sister Rosalind and Brother Peregrine, into the quasi-religious abbey of Thelema, a monastic institution founded on Rabelais' dictum, "Do what you will." It is worth reading the plot of The Monks of Thelema, as well as the contrasting and opposing characters of Paul Rondelet and Alan Dunlop, as a reaction to aestheticism. According to Ian Fletcher, this novel contrasts those who confront and those who evade the ugliness of common life. While the effete aesthete Rondelet evades, Dunlop, who embraces John Ruskin's missionary aestheticism, confronts. The over-acculturated Rondelet, who selfishly turns his back on mankind, fed the popular perception of aestheticism as elitist and exclusive. Conversely, Dunlop's attempts to improve the lot of his estate workers by inculcating them into higher culture is portrayed as well-meaning but misguided. Such lofty ideals, civilising Caliban, might destabilise the social hierarchy. A new pagan, Paul Rondelet was the self-appointed leader of a school of unhealthy and even morbid prigs. Quote, "Some of them are still at Oxford, but some may now be found in London. They lounge about sales of china and bric-a-brac. They take afternoon tea at the club, and they worship at the Grosvenor Gallery. They are not loved by any men, but are greatly believed in by certain women. They are always promising to do great things, but nothing ever comes. Meantime they grow sadder and yet more sad over the wretched stuff which the outside world, the babbling, eager, fighting world, calls art, poetry and fiction." End quote. Wilde, who you see here in William Powell Frith's Private View at the Royal Academy, 1881, hitched his star to aestheticism on an undergraduate at Oxford. His rooms were noted for their beauty, the panelled walls thickly hung with old engravings and contemporary prints by Burne-Jones, and filled with exquisite bric-a-brac, blue and white oriental porcelain, Tanagra statuettes brought back from Greece, and Persian rugs. Wilde launched his career as an art critic by publishing a review of the opening exhibition at the Grosvenor Gallery in the Dublin University magazine. Wilde's success rested upon demonstrating that he had better taste and knowledge than his readers. An Oxford exquisite who lauded a correctly worn tie, Wilde's persona was apparently attractive to women. As Michel Mendelssohn reminds us, today Wilde's semi-seduction seems surprising because we think of him as a homosexual and not as the Victorians did, as a lover of women. Ian Fletcher suggests that Rondelet's name may owe something to the French and English Parnassian poets, or to the Rondeleiers, who pursued the idea of formal purity. This archaic poetic form was also revived by Wilde. A fellow of Lothian College, Oxford, Rondelet's physical characteristics recall Wilde. He was rather a tall man, with a droop in his head, whilst his long white fingers played plaintively about his face whilst he sat. He spoke in a low voice, as if exhausted by the effort of living among humans, and he spoke with melancholy, as if his superiority were a burden to him. He affected omnipotence. He talked in a vague way, but a good deal about the Renaissance, an epoch which his school kept bottled up all for themselves, as if it were to be enjoyed only by the worthy. He said that we only have one great living poet, Mr. Rossetti, and one who would be great if his meaning were not so plain and simple, Mr. Browning. He said also that the greatest master of modern English is Mr. Pater, and that Mr. Whistler is the greatest artist. He shuddered when Christianity was mentioned. He groaned when anyone admired any other modern writer, poet, painter or poet. As regards politics, he thought a refined despair the only attitude worthy of a great intellect, and he wished to convey the impression that behind his brow lay infinite possibilities, things which would make the whole world wonder when they came to be actually done, could he, if only be persuaded to pass from meditation to action. If it had not been for the amazing conceit and expression in attitude and voice, Mr. Rondelet would have been certainly good-looking. Nature meant him even to be handsome. Too much culture spoiled that intention. Adopting the highest form of selfishness, Rondelet advocated exclusion. I have brought myself to think, notwithstanding all the talk we had at Oxford when we were younger men, Dunlop, that the great men, the giants of the Renaissance, were right in leaving the common herd to their own devices. They lived like gods, apart, and enjoyed by themselves the true pleasures of the higher culture. What more delightful life may be imagined than an atmosphere of art among a little circle from which all ignoble people will be excluded, all contact with the uncultivated hedged out. This was the secret of the new morals. That is what we desire to teach, the new virtue of pure selfishness. Every man must find out the higher life and live it, regardless of others, all to himself. Pleased with his new philosophy, Rondelet plans a paper on the wretchedness of living at all, which, wrapped in the most scholarly language and flashing with epigram, should at one stroke make him famous. Unfortunately, it was already done in the 19th century. Contrasting with Rondelet, Alan Dunlop, the son of Lord Alwyn Fontaine, was an earnest undergraduate who had the courage of his own convictions. When Alan Dunlop was in his second year, the great movement of the 19th century began. At least that is what they called it. I believe it was Alan himself who started it. I mean, of course, the project for advancing humanity by digging ditches and making roads. They sallied forth, those pioneers and humanists, spade in hand. They dug and were not a bit ashamed. This is obviously an overt reference to John Ruskin's infamous road building scheme. Allen only gave up when it became clear that he could do no more good, single-spaded, to humanity. But he remembered too that he was wealthy, and with his friends of the exalted school began to talk about the responsibility of wealth. Dunlop hopes that by living among the people I shall in a short time succeed in persuading them to look upon me as one of themselves, a simple fellow labourer who has received a better education and had greater advantages to start with. Yet caste could not be eradicated, as Dunlop saw himself as a natural leader. In a beatic vision, Dunlop hopes Miranda, the abbess of Thelema, will join him as brother and sister labourer to realise his goals. Living in the village, among the people, belonging to them, he to the men and she to the women, so that while he introduced new ideas and combated old habits amongst one sex, she might be among the others, inculcating the arts of cleanliness, order, good temper, or rudiments of that sweet culture which in a very few years' time was to make a home of delight in every cottage, and to form a West End club, except for the drink and luxurious living and the cigars and easy chairs in every village. Dunlop establishes a cooperative shop and a good liquor bar, but offering no credit, the villagers continue to use the existing shop as they have accrued debts which cannot be paid off. The free library and reading room are created to encourage the labourers to spend their evenings rationally and to lure them away from the Spotted Cow pub. He envisages a night school, a shed for drilling the younger men and boys, and as a love of art was only latent, a picture and art gallery, arguing why should art belong only to wealthy people? The contemplation of beautiful things will awaken the dormant sense. I am going to have festivals and dances for the people. They are stupid because they get no amusements. Here Besant is referencing Octavia and Miranda's Hill newly founded Curl Society, whose mantra was bring beauty home to the people. We see here the opening of Vauxhall Park, which was created under the auspices of the Curl Society. Through its 4 committees, the Curl decorated hospitals, schools, literary institutes and working class clubs, arranged music concerts, provided books and journals, and created open spaces for the urban working poor. Numerous branches were established across the country, notably in Birmingham, Bristol and Nottingham. Even William Morris supported the aims, speaking at the Curl's first public meeting. Inevitably, all Dunlop's well-meaning interventions fail. The great difficulty was that nobody wanted to read, nobody wanted to change, nobody wanted to improve. The duty of discontent had not been taught these simple rustics. Although unable to enter their minds, Dunlop refuses to abandon his social experiment, conceding he needs a woman's help. In an act of total selfishness, Dunlop proposes to take Alma Bostock, a village girl, as his wife. But at the denouement of the novel, Alma, choosing true love over social position, runs off with the gamekeeper, Harry Cardew. Through the voices of Dunlop and Rondelet, a clear distinction is drawn between the inclusive Ruskinian approach and the exclusive Paterian aesthete who forsakes his fellow man. Besant's later novels endeavoured to arouse the public's conscience. All Sorts of Conditions of Men of 1882 and The Alabaster Box of 1900 centred on the plight of the respectable working classes of London's East End. Apparently, he had adopted his own creation, Alan Dunlop's egalitarian outlook. Thank you for listening. Should you need to get in contact with me, here is my email, ann.anderson99@talk21, and there is a copy of this video presentation on my YouTube site, Ann Anderson Art and Design History channel. Thank you very much.